He was one of the richest men in the country, but no one in his mansion knew he was secretly pretending to be just the janitor. Tired of seeing his autistic son treated like a burden by caregivers who didn't care, he decided to test a new maid without revealing who he really was. She thought he was just another worker, until one day he caught her doing something with his son that no one else had ever done before. What he saw changed everything. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Blake lived in a large, quiet mansion on the edge of a wooded area. The house had long, dark hallways, high ceilings, and rooms filled with expensive furniture that hardly anyone used. Ever since the birth of his son, Liam, the place felt empty. Liam was 6 years old, used a wheelchair, and was autistic. He rarely spoke or made eye contact and needed constant care. But after many failed attempts with different caregivers, Richard had given up hope of finding someone who could really help. He barely left the house and didn't trust people anymore. Most days, Richard spent his time in his office, reviewing papers or looking out the window in silence. One morning, without announcing anything to anyone, he quietly hired a new housekeeper. Her name was Emma Johnson. She was young and seemed kind. She didn't know much about the house or its secrets, but that same day she arrived at the mansion for her interview. Emma stood at the front gate holding a small suitcase. She looked around nervously before pressing the intercom button. A voice answered and buzzed her in. As she walked up the path, she took in the size of the mansion. It was much bigger than any house she'd worked in before. She was greeted at the door by an older woman named Mrs. Collins, the house's head housekeeper. Mrs. Collins didn't smile much, but was polite and firm. She led Emma through the entrance hall and into a sitting room for the interview. Emma noticed how quiet everything was. The only sounds were the ticking clock and their footsteps on the marble floor. During the interview, Mrs. Collins asked about her experience with children and people with special needs. Emma answered honestly. She didn't lie or exaggerate. What she didn't know was that someone else was listening carefully from another room. A man pretending to be a new maintenance worker. That man was Richard Blake himself, wearing plain work clothes and pretending to check a thermostat near the wall. He watched Emma closely through a mirror that was actually a one-way window. Richard didn't trust anyone, especially not someone coming into his house to care for his son. He had made up his mind that this was the only way to be sure someone was sincere. He had done the same with every new employee before, hiding in plain sight to see how they acted when they thought no one important was watching. As Emma spoke, he studied her face, her posture, and how she responded to the questions. He noticed that she didn't try to impress anyone. She looked calm, but also a little nervous, which he found more honest than fake confidence. He made a note to himself to speak with Mrs. Collins later to hear her opinion. But already he was forming one of his own. While the interview continued, Mrs. Collins gave Emma more information about the job. She explained that her main responsibility would be helping take care of Liam, feeding him, keeping him clean, and engaging him with small daily routines. She also warned Emma that Liam didn't react well to strangers and didn't like to be touched suddenly. Emma listened carefully and took mental notes. She nodded and asked thoughtful questions, which Mrs. Collins appreciated. After a while, Emma was given a short tour of the house. They walked past the kitchen, the laundry room, and then up the stairs to the hallway where Liam's room was. Everything was spotless but felt cold, like no one had laughed there in years. Mrs. Collins mentioned that Liam's mother passed away shortly after he was born, and Richard hadn't been the same since. Emma didn't ask for details, but she understood the job wouldn't just be about cleaning, it was about being part of a broken family's daily life. Downstairs, Richard continued to move around unnoticed. He cleaned a window, checked a light fixture, and stayed within earshot. He didn't say much to the other staff, which was normal for him. Everyone in the house had gotten used to his distant behavior. Emma eventually finished her tour and was shown to the kitchen to meet the cook, an older man named George. They exchanged a few polite words. Richard stood nearby, pretending to fix a cabinet door. He watched how Emma interacted with George. She was respectful and didn't try too hard to impress anyone. She asked George about Liam's favorite foods and what time he usually ate. That surprised Richard. Most people just asked how difficult Liam was. Emma didn't. She focused on what Liam liked, not on what made him hard to deal with. Richard took another mental note. Maybe this young woman was different from the others. Still, he didn't let his guard down. Later that afternoon, Emma was taken outside to see the garden and the back entrance. As they walked, Richard took a moment to pull Mrs. Collins aside. He asked her quietly what she thought of Emma. Mrs. Collins said Emma seemed decent and not overconfident, which was a good sign. She added that Emma asked the right kind of questions, not just about the job, but about Liam himself. Richard nodded, thinking. He still didn't fully trust her, but something about Emma's behavior seemed real. Back inside, Emma was getting ready to leave. She thanked Mrs. Collins and said she hoped to hear back soon. Richard watched her go without saying a word. Emma had no idea that the man she'd seen fixing things was the owner of the house, or that he was the one who would decide her future. As the door closed behind her, Richard remained silent, lost in thought about what he had just seen and heard. Emma's first day started early in the morning. She arrived at the mansion wearing a clean uniform, holding a small bag with her personal items. Mrs. Collins met her at the door and guided her straight to the second floor. "Today, you don't have to do anything. Just watch him," she said firmly. "He doesn't speak. He doesn't like to be touched, and he gets upset if people get too close." Emma listened carefully, nodding. She asked if Liam liked any music or toys. "He has a spinning toy, that's all," Mrs. Collins replied. They walked down a quiet hallway until they reached a room with large windows. Inside, Liam sat in his wheelchair, facing the light. His hands were busy turning a small red toy over and over. He didn't look at them. He just mumbled softly to himself, almost like whispering to the toy. Mrs. Collins gave Emma a quick glance and left her alone with the boy, quietly closing the door behind her. Emma stood still for a moment, unsure what to do next. She remembered Mrs. Collins's warning, so she didn't move closer to the boy. Instead, she found a spot on the carpet a few meters away and sat down slowly. She opened her bag and took out a notebook, a few colored pencils, and a small toy duck she thought might be useful someday. She didn't speak to Liam. She didn't call his name. She simply started drawing on the floor. After a few minutes, she began humming a quiet tune. Nothing loud or too cheerful, just soft and steady. Liam didn't react. He kept turning the toy in his hands and mumbling. His eyes stayed fixed on the same spot. Emma kept drawing. She sketched a small house, then a tree, then a sun in the corner of the page. Her movements were calm. She didn't look at Liam too much, but she made sure he could see what she was doing if he wanted to. Time passed slowly, but Emma remained patient. After about 30 minutes, she looked up and noticed that Liam had paused. He was still holding his spinning toy, but his fingers had stopped moving. He wasn't mumbling anymore either. His head was slightly turned, not directly at her, but in her direction. Emma kept her focus on her drawing, pretending not to notice. She didn't want to scare him. She simply flipped the page and started a new sketch, this time of a toy that looked a bit like the one in Liam's hands. As she drew, she quietly hummed the same melody. She hoped he would feel safe, or at least not threatened. For her, the goal wasn't to change him or rush progress. It was just to make him feel like she wasn't a problem. Liam didn't move his head again, but he didn't go back to mumbling either. That small pause meant something to Emma. It meant he had noticed her. Standing just outside the door, Richard was holding a mop, a bucket and a pair of gloves. He had planned to clean the hallway floors, but instead he found himself frozen, watching through the narrow glass opening in the door. He could see Emma sitting on the floor, calm and quiet, not doing anything aggressive or fake. He saw Liam sitting exactly where he always did, but there was a small difference. The boy wasn't spinning the toy as fast as usual. His shoulders were relaxed. His mumbling had stopped. Richard tilted his head slightly. Every other caretaker had tried to speak to Liam right away. They had raised their voices, waved toys in his face, or touched him without warning. Liam always reacted badly, but Emma didn't do any of that. She didn't even try to speak to him. She just stayed nearby, drawing and humming to herself, as if being with Liam was normal. Richard didn't understand her approach, but he kept watching. As the morning passed, Emma stayed in the room with Liam without rushing anything. Around noon, Mrs. Collins brought her a sandwich and water. Emma whispered a thank you and stayed on the floor, eating quietly. Liam glanced at the movement, but he didn't seem upset. Emma decided to continue what she was doing. She took out a small piece of modeling clay and started shaping it into a little ball. Slowly, she turned it into a dog, then a rabbit. She placed the figures beside her notebook and returned to drawing. She didn't look at Liam directly, but she kept the figures in his line of sight. At one point, Liam shifted in his chair. It wasn't much, just a tiny movement, but Emma noticed it. It was the first time he'd adjusted his body while someone else was in the room. For her, that was a signal. She was in his space, and he hadn't rejected it. That was enough for one day. As the afternoon came to an end, Mrs. Collins returned and told Emma she could leave the room. Emma nodded and slowly packed up her things. She stood up carefully, not wanting to startle Liam. Before she left, she placed one of the clay animals, the small dog, on a nearby shelf, still far from Liam, but visible. Liam didn't react, but he didn't look away either. Emma gave one final glance and walked out. Outside the room, Richard was still nearby. Emma didn't know he had been watching almost the entire time. She smiled politely as she passed him, thinking he was just one of the staff. Richard looked at her with a neutral face, but was deep in thought. He had seen something he hadn't seen in a long time, a moment of calm in his son's presence. Inside the room, Liam picked up his spinning toy again. But before he started turning it, he looked toward the shelf, where the little dog now sat. One morning, Emma was assigned to help tidy the back garden near Liam's room. She put on gloves, grabbed a broom, and began sweeping leaves from the path near the window. The sun was up, and the garden was quiet. As she bent down to pick up a few sticks near the bushes, something on the window ledge caught her attention. It was small, round, and slightly dusty. Curious, she stepped closer and saw it was an old seashell. It didn't look decorative, just a real worn shell with a few scratches. It had likely been sitting there for a long time. Emma picked it up gently and rubbed off the dirt. She turned it over in her hand, then looked up at Liam's window. He was inside, sitting in his wheelchair as usual. Without thinking too much, Emma wiped the shell clean with a cloth from her pocket. She walked into the house and brought it to Liam's room, still holding the shell carefully in her hand. When she entered, Liam didn't look at her. He was spinning a toy in his hand again, murmuring softly like always. Emma didn't interrupt him. She quietly walked over and placed the shell on a small table next to his chair. Then she sat on the carpet a short distance away, just like before. After a few minutes, Liam stopped moving his toy. His eyes shifted to the shell. He slowly reached out and picked it up, holding it carefully. Emma didn't speak. She simply watched. Liam brought the shell close to his ear and held it there for a long time. His expression changed. His eyes softened, and for a moment he smiled. It wasn't wide or loud, but it was real. Emma noticed right away. That tiny reaction meant something important. The shell had done something that no words could. Liam held it like it was familiar, like it brought him peace. Emma stayed quiet, giving him space to feel whatever he was feeling. Later that day, Liam had a small outburst. He became tense, started rocking in his chair, and made distressed sounds. Usually, Mrs. Collins or another staff member would step in to calm him down, but Emma was nearby and acted quickly. Instead of speaking loudly or trying to hold him, she grabbed the shell from the table and gently placed it in Liam's hands. At first, he didn't notice, but then his fingers tightened around it. Slowly, he lifted it to his ear. The rocking stopped. His breathing slowed. Emma sat beside him on the floor, not too close, and waited. Liam stayed like that for several minutes, just listening to the sound inside the shell. When he finally lowered it, his body was relaxed again. Emma realized she had found something special, a way to connect with Liam when he couldn't use words. It wasn't a trick or therapy tool. It was just a simple object that seemed to bring him comfort when nothing else could. Over the next few days, Emma made sure the shell was always nearby. She didn't push it on Liam, but kept it where he could reach it. Sometimes he ignored it, but other times, especially when he seemed stressed or tired, he would pick it up and listen again. Emma also started using it as a gentle signal. Before a bath or before brushing his hair, things that usually made Liam anxious, she would show him the shell first. It became a way to say, "It's okay, you're safe." And more often than not, it worked. Liam responded by staying calmer, more open. Emma never claimed to understand exactly why it worked. She just paid attention and used what she learned. Each time Liam reached for the shell on his own, Emma felt a small sense of progress. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Liam was beginning to let her in, even if just a little. And she was beginning to feel more connected to him too. One afternoon, Richard was walking past Liam's room with a folder in his hand. The door was slightly open. He stopped when he heard a soft tapping sound. Looking inside, he saw Emma sitting on the floor, calmly showing Liam a picture book while he held the shell to his ear. Liam looked peaceful, not restless or withdrawn. For a few seconds, Richard just stood there, a strange feeling built in his chest. No one had ever used the shell before, not since his wife passed away. She had collected shells during a trip before Liam was born. That particular shell had been hers. After her death, Richard had placed it on the window ledge and never touched it again. He didn't think Liam would even remember it, but clearly, something about it remained. Watching his son find comfort in something that once belonged to his mother hit Richard hard. He didn't say anything, but the scene stayed in his mind for the rest of the day. Emma didn't know any of that. To her, it was just an old shell she'd found while cleaning, something simple that brought a small smile to Liam's face. But without realizing it, she had touched something deeper, a memory, a connection between mother and child that had been buried for years. Every time she used the shell, it wasn't just helping Liam, it was bringing life back into the house. Richard began to notice more. The boy who once refused to look at anyone was now turning his head, reacting. Emma's patience wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't talk about miracles or breakthroughs. She simply observed and adapted, and in doing so, she had reached Liam in a way no one else ever had. Richard began to question his own walls, wondering how this stranger had done so much in such a short time. But Emma still didn't know the history behind that shell. Not yet. All she knew was that it helped, and that was enough for her. Richard had continued pretending to be the new janitor in the mansion. He wore the same plain clothes every day, worn jeans, a cap, and an old jacket. His hands were always holding a rag or bucket. That image helped him stay unnoticed. But lately, Emma had started greeting him more often. During her short breaks, she would nod and smile. Sometimes she offered him tea or asked if he needed help carrying anything. At first, Richard kept his answers short. He didn't want to get too close. But over time, Emma's honest and respectful attitude made him lower his guard. Unlike others who ignored or looked down on house staff, Emma spoke to him like an equal. One afternoon, while they were both in the service hallway, she sat on a step near the wall and started talking. She asked him simple things: how long he had worked there, if he liked the house. Richard gave vague answers, but didn't walk away like he used to. Their conversations slowly became more frequent. Emma didn't push, but when she had free moments, she would chat with him about small things, the weather, the garden, or what Liam had done that day. One time, she mentioned how quiet the mansion was and said it sometimes felt more like a museum than a home. Richard gave a short laugh, surprising himself. It was the first time he had laughed in front of someone in months. Emma smiled and continued. She talked about her childhood in a small town, how her parents didn't have much money, and how she learned early to take care of others. She said she had worked in different homes, but none were like this one. Richard listened while pretending to scrub a sink or fix a light fixture. Emma didn't know he was the owner. She didn't treat him any differently because of status. That was new to Richard, and it made him feel strangely comfortable around her. One day, while they were both in the laundry room folding towels, Emma opened up more. She said she had always felt something special when helping children who struggled to speak or connect. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to them. She admitted she had never studied psychology formally, but wanted to someday. She dreamed of going to university, maybe taking night classes, if she could save enough. Richard paused, holding a folded sheet in his hand. He looked at her for a second, then nodded slowly. "Sounds like you'd be good at it," he said. Emma smiled and thanked him. That moment stuck with him longer than he expected. She wasn't just a worker doing a job. She had depth, kindness, and a sense of purpose. Every time she spoke, Richard found himself wanting to say more, but he always stopped. He didn't want to break the lie. He was still just the janitor in her eyes, and part of him wanted to keep it that way. Another time, during a quiet afternoon, Emma found Richard wiping a window frame in the hallway near Liam's room. She sat nearby and started telling him about Liam's progress. She said he was responding more, looking at her sometimes, and accepting small routines like brushing his hair or washing his hands. She said it felt like they were building something real. Then she added something unexpected. She told Richard that being around Liam gave her a strange feeling, like a missing part inside her had finally found something to connect with. "I can't explain it," she said, looking at her hands. "It's like something in him speaks to something in me." Richard stayed silent, but her words hit him hard. He had felt alone in that exact same way for years. Hearing her say it, in such simple words, stirred something in him. He didn't know if he should be happy or afraid. She was getting closer to Liam, and closer to him without even knowing it. Richard started feeling conflicted. Every day that passed, Emma saw him as someone he wasn't. She trusted him. She shared her thoughts, her hopes, and even her fears. But it was all based on a lie. He wasn't just a janitor. He was the one who had hired her, tested her, and watched her like a stranger. The more she talked, the more Richard saw the damage the lie could cause if revealed too late. But at the same time, he didn't want to break the quiet connection they were building. For the first time since his wife's death and Liam's diagnosis, someone was making him feel alive again. He caught himself smiling after their talks, or replaying things she had said in his head. He hadn't done that in years, but hiding behind the janitor mask also meant he couldn't be honest. He couldn't thank her for what she was doing for Liam, and he couldn't say how much it meant to him personally. On one particular evening, after most of the staff had left and the house was quiet, Emma and Richard found themselves cleaning the same corridor. They worked in silence at first. Then Emma started talking again, about Liam's shell, about how small things could matter more than big efforts. Richard just listened, nodding occasionally. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "You're a good listener, you know. Better than most." He gave a half smile and looked away. Inside, he felt torn. Each word she said made him want to tell her the truth, but fear held him back. If she knew who he really was, would she still talk to him like this? Would she still laugh, share stories, and open her heart? As Emma returned to her tasks, Richard remained behind, standing still for a few seconds. He looked down at the mop in his hand, then back at the hallway where Emma had gone. His heart felt heavier with each passing day. Emma was cleaning the office that afternoon. The room was quiet, filled with tall bookshelves, dusty frames, and folders neatly stacked on a wooden desk. She had been asked to dust the shelves and organize some of the books by category. As she moved a few volumes aside, she noticed something behind a row of encyclopedias. It was a small frame, hidden and covered in a thin layer of dust. Curious, she pulled it out carefully and looked at it. Inside was an old photo of a woman, maybe in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The woman had the same eyes as Liam, that same soft, distant gaze. The frame didn't have any names or notes. Emma stared at the photo for a few seconds, confused about why it was hidden behind the books. She wiped the glass with her sleeve and continued looking. Something told her this woman was important. Without thinking much more, Emma decided to show the picture to Liam. She entered Liam's room quietly as usual. He was by the window, spinning a toy in his hand. Emma didn't speak right away. She walked over slowly and sat on the floor near his chair. Then she placed the photo frame in front of her so he could see it. At first, Liam didn't notice. He kept spinning the toy, lost in his own world. But after a minute, his eyes moved slightly. He stopped spinning. His gaze shifted to the photo. He didn't blink. He just stared at the woman's face. Emma watched closely. Liam's eyes were wide open, and he seemed to be thinking deeply. Then, very slowly, he reached out and touched the glass with his small hand. His fingers rested gently over the image of the woman's face. He didn't say anything clearly, but a soft sound came from his lips. A short, quiet murmur. Emma couldn't make out the words. It wasn't clear speech, but it wasn't nothing either. Emma waited in silence, letting Liam stay with the photo as long as he needed. He didn't look at her or ask anything, but his hand remained on the frame for almost a full minute. That alone told her something was different. When he finally let go, Emma gently took the picture and placed it on the nearby table where he could still see it. Later, she walked down the hall and found Mrs. Collins folding towels in the laundry room. Emma held up the frame and asked softly, "Who is she?" Mrs. Collins glanced at it and replied without emotion, "That was Mrs. Blake. She passed away during childbirth." Emma didn't respond right away. Her stomach tightened. She looked again at the picture and then thought of Liam. He had never met his mother. She had died before he could know her face, her voice, or her touch. The missing pieces started to make sense. That absence wasn't just part of the house, it was part of Liam too. Emma returned to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, still holding the frame. The weight of what she had learned stayed heavy in her chest. She thought about Liam's behavior, his silence, his resistance to touch, his deep focus on objects rather than people. And now, knowing that he had never felt his mother's arms, never heard her say his name, made everything more painful to understand. Emma began to see his actions not just as symptoms of autism, but also as signs of something deeper, a silent search for something he never had. A mother's hug, a calming voice, the warmth of being held. He had been looking for it without knowing it, and maybe, just maybe, he had felt a small part of it in Emma's presence, not because she tried to replace anyone, but because she was there, calm, patient, and gentle, offering what he had missed from the very beginning without even realizing it herself. From that day on, Emma kept the photo in Liam's room, near his toys. She didn't mention it again, but she noticed Liam glancing at it sometimes. He didn't touch it every day, but it was clear the image had left an impression. Emma also noticed that during moments of quiet, Liam would look toward the frame before calming down, as if the face of the woman brought him something comforting, even if he didn't fully understand who she was. Emma's care became even more delicate. She paid attention to every small reaction, every pause, every shift in his eyes. Richard didn't comment on the picture's reappearance in the room, but he must have seen it. If he had any feelings about it, he kept them to himself. Emma never brought it up. She respected the silence around the subject, even though it filled her with questions. She now knew that Liam's pain went beyond his condition. It came from something no child should grow up without. One evening, while Emma was folding Liam's clean clothes, she caught a small moment. Liam was sitting by the window, and the photo was in view. He turned his head toward it, then looked at Emma. His gaze lasted longer than usual. He didn't speak, but his hand reached toward her gently, not to touch, but to acknowledge. Emma didn't move too fast. She smiled and placed one of his soft toys in his lap, then sat beside him. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that quiet space, something had shifted. Emma wasn't just another caregiver. She'd become someone Liam trusted, someone who brought a little piece of what had always been missing. The photo stayed in the room, not as decoration, but as a quiet reminder of a woman Liam never met but still seemed to feel. And Emma, now aware of this, began to care for Liam not just with patience, but with something closer to love. It started during the night. A heavy storm hit the area, bringing strong winds and loud thunder. The sound of rain hitting the windows filled the house. Most of the staff had already gone to bed or stayed in their rooms. Emma was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when she heard the first scream. It was sharp and high-pitched. Then came the loud banging, repeated thuds against wood or metal. She ran upstairs without thinking. In the hallway near Liam's room, she found two workers standing by the door, unsure of what to do. Inside, Liam was in full crisis. He was crying, screaming, kicking the sides of his wheelchair. His hands hit the armrests again and again. His face was red, and his body was tense. No one moved to stop him. Emma rushed in, ignoring the noise. She dropped to her knees in front of him. He was shaking. Thunder cracked outside. Without waiting, she wrapped her arms around his small frame. At first, Liam resisted. He pushed and kicked, trying to break free. Emma held on tightly, whispering soft words into his ear. "It's okay, I'm here, you're safe." Her arms didn't let go, even when he hit her shoulder or pulled her hair. She knew he had never allowed this kind of touch before, but this moment was different. He was scared, more than ever before, and alone inside his panic. The storm outside only made it worse. His body trembled, but slowly his hands stopped hitting. His breathing became slower, heavier. Emma kept holding him, her cheek resting gently against his. The other workers watched in shock from the hallway, but didn't step in. No one else knew what to do. Richard came rushing in seconds later, still wearing his janitor gloves and holding a cleaning rag. He froze at the door. What he saw stopped him completely. His son, silent in Emma's arms, no longer screaming, no longer crying, just breathing. Richard didn't move. He stood in the doorway, eyes wide, chest tight. For a moment he felt useless. This was his son, the child he had raised alone, the child he had failed to comfort so many times, and here was Emma, a stranger only weeks ago, holding Liam like she had known him forever. Richard dropped the rag in his hand. His gloves were still on, but he didn't care. He took a slow step forward, then stopped again. He didn't want to break the moment. Liam's head was resting against Emma's shoulder now. His body had gone limp, not from exhaustion, but from calm. Emma gently rubbed his back, still whispering. Then something happened that froze both Emma and Richard completely. In a soft, broken voice, Liam whispered a single word: "Shell." It was barely audible, but it was clear. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Richard stepped back, his breath caught. That one word carried more weight than anything Liam had ever said before. Emma didn't cry loudly. She just let the tears fall silently while keeping Liam close. She didn't speak, didn't react much. She simply kept holding him as he rested. Richard leaned against the doorframe, one hand on the wall. He looked at the floor, trying to keep his emotions inside. But it was impossible. The image in front of him broke something inside. For years, he had built a wall. No feelings, no vulnerability, just control. But now that wall was starting to crack. Liam had spoken, and not just any word. He had said shell, the same object that Emma had given him, the one that once belonged to his mother. It wasn't just a random sound, it had meaning. Emma slowly looked up and saw Richard standing there. She didn't know who he really was, but she saw the emotion on his face. She saw a man torn between pride and pain. The silence between them felt heavy, but also full of something real. After a few more minutes, Liam fell asleep in her arms. Emma gently placed him back in his chair, making sure he was secure and comfortable. She wiped her face with her sleeve and stood up. Richard finally stepped into the room. He didn't say anything right away. His eyes stayed on Liam, now calm, now resting. Then very quietly he said, "He's never done that before." Emma nodded. Her voice cracked when she replied, "I know." She didn't ask why he was there or why he looked so affected. Something told her not to. Richard knelt next to Liam and touched his son's hand softly. Liam didn't wake. Emma watched, confused but moved. In that small room, with the storm still going on outside, the three of them were surrounded by something deep. Connection, pain, healing, all mixed together. Richard looked at Emma for a second and opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. But no words came. He just nodded slowly and stood up again. They both left the room together, walking slowly down the hall without speaking. Emma didn't press him with questions. She could tell he was carrying something big inside. She still believed he was the janitor, but something about his presence that night felt different, more personal, more involved. Richard walked with her to the end of the hallway, then stopped. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet but serious. Emma gave a small smile and nodded. "He just needed someone," she replied. Neither of them spoke again. Emma walked toward her room, her body tired, her mind full of questions. Richard stood alone for a moment, staring out the hallway window, rain still hitting the glass. His hands trembled slightly. The moment had changed everything. Liam had spoken, Emma had reached him, and Richard could no longer pretend he was just a bystander. Emotionally, his disguise was breaking, but his secret was still safe, for now. The truth remained hidden, even as everything else began to shift. The morning started like any other. Emma walked into the kitchen and picked up Liam's breakfast tray. It had a small bowl of warm porridge, a spoon, a napkin, and his favorite sippy cup with apple juice. She walked up the stairs and gently opened Liam's door. He was already awake, sitting in his wheelchair near the window. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Good morning, Liam," she said softly, setting the tray on the nearby table. He gave a soft hum and a tiny smile. She rolled him over to the small table and pulled up a chair beside him. She scooped some porridge and gently brought it to his mouth. He opened up and ate without protest. That alone was progress. Between spoonfuls, Emma made funny faces and Liam giggled. His laughter filled the room in a way that made the space feel alive. Then suddenly, without warning, Liam pointed at her with his small hand and said, in a quiet but clear voice, "I wish you're my mommy." Emma froze, spoon still in hand. Her eyes met Liam's wide with surprise. She blinked quickly, unsure if she had heard correctly, but Liam repeated it, this time even more clearly. "I wish you're my mommy." His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. The room went completely silent. Richard, who had been quietly sweeping the far corner of the room in his usual janitor disguise, dropped the broom without meaning to. The wooden handle hit the floor with a loud thud. No one moved. Emma looked over at him for just a second, then back at Liam. Her heart was pounding. She could feel her eyes getting wet, but she didn't want to cry in front of the boy. She smiled and gently touched Liam's hand. "You have a special place in my heart, my little angel," she said softly. Liam smiled, satisfied. He didn't know the weight of what he had just said. But the adults in the room did. Richard turned away quickly, pretending to pick up the broom, but he didn't move right away. His back was to them, but his shoulders were tense, his throat tightened, and his eyes stung. That single sentence from Liam felt like a punch and a warm hug at the same time. Richard had always known Liam missed something deep, something he couldn't fully express, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a new way. It wasn't just about the absence of a mother. It was about the presence of someone who made him feel safe, seen, and loved. Emma, still sitting with Liam, wiped a tear from the corner of her eye when he wasn't looking. She wanted to keep the moment calm, without turning it into something too big, but inside, her emotions were rushing. Liam had spoken a sentence, a full sentence, with meaning, with feeling. That alone would have been huge, but what he chose to say made it unforgettable. After a few seconds, Richard quietly left the room. He didn't say a word. He walked down the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the garden behind the house. The air was cool and the sky was cloudy, but he didn't care. He needed a moment to breathe. He sat on the bench near the old oak tree, the one where his wife used to sit with a book before Liam was born. He closed his eyes and leaned back. The memory of her rushed in, her smile, her voice. The way she had talked to their unborn child, dreaming of what kind of mother she would be. She never got the chance. And now, years later, her son had looked at another woman, a kind, patient stranger, and called her Mommy. Richard didn't feel angry. He felt broken and grateful at the same time. Something was healing in that house, something deep, and it wasn't just Liam, it was him too. Back in the room, Emma continued feeding Liam slowly. He was calm now, more relaxed than usual. After finishing the porridge, he leaned into her gently, letting his head rest against her arm. Emma didn't move. She just let him stay there, her hand gently stroking his hair. In her mind, she kept hearing the words he had spoken. She didn't take them as a replacement for his real mother, but as a sign that he was opening up, reaching out in his own way. It was a huge step for a boy who used to scream when someone got too close. Now he was asking for connection, even if he didn't fully understand the meaning of his words. Emma looked around the room. The photo of Liam's mother was still there, resting on the shelf. Emma gave it a brief glance, almost like sharing the moment with the woman she had never met. She felt honored, not because of a title, but because of the trust Liam had given her. Richard stayed outside for a while, lost in thought. When he returned, the house was quiet again. He passed by Liam's room and saw Emma cleaning up the tray. She looked over at him and gave a polite smile. He nodded back but said nothing. Something had changed between them, though neither spoke of it. That night, Richard sat in his private study and stared at a closed drawer. Inside it were old photos, letters, and a small envelope with his wife's handwriting. He opened it for the first time in years. The letter inside spoke of dreams, of the kind of mother she hoped to be. As he read, tears ran down his face. He folded the letter, placed it back, and whispered, "He's doing okay." The next morning, Richard didn't put on his janitor clothes. He stayed in his own. But he still watched from a distance as Liam greeted Emma with a smile, the kind that said, "I feel safe with you." And that was enough. Emma had been feeling something was off for a while. At first, she didn't question it. The man who called himself the janitor was always nearby, always listening, and always showing up when something important happened. She thought maybe he was just someone who cared deeply about the house or about Liam, but then she started noticing other things. He didn't take orders from anyone. When Mrs. Collins made suggestions, he either ignored them or gave her a look that made her stop talking. One afternoon, while dusting in the office again, Emma came across a framed group photo. It looked old. In the corner of the picture was a younger Richard, dressed in a formal suit, standing beside the same woman from Liam's portrait. Emma froze. The face was unmistakable. It was the same man who cleaned windows and floors every day, always pretending to be invisible. Her mind started piecing things together. Emma wasn't angry yet, just confused, but she knew she needed answers. The next day, Emma didn't avoid him. Instead, she waited for the right moment. Around lunchtime, she found him alone in the back hallway, wiping down the edge of a window like always. Her heart beat faster, but she stayed calm. She walked over and stood beside him. He looked up, surprised to see her so close. Emma looked him in the eyes and asked quietly, "You're not just a janitor, are you?" Richard didn't speak at first. He lowered his cloth slowly and leaned against the wall. There was no point in lying now. He took a deep breath, then nodded. "No, I'm not," he admitted. Emma didn't interrupt. She waited. Richard explained everything, how he was really Richard Blake, the owner of the mansion, Liam's father, and the man who had hired her. He told her how he had been watching her from the beginning, pretending to be someone else, because he didn't trust people anymore. His voice cracked as he spoke. He told her about the others who had come and gone, about how none of them had stayed, about how they treated Liam like a burden or gave up when things became hard. He said he didn't want to see another person walk in, pretending to care, and walk out leaving more damage behind. So he decided to test her, to see her without filters, without knowing who he was. "It was the only way I could be sure," he said. Emma listened without saying much. She felt disappointed, not because of the lie itself, but because he hadn't trusted her from the start. She had opened herself up, shared things, talked freely, all while being watched like she was on trial. After a long pause, Emma said softly, "You didn't need to test me. I wasn't here for you. I was here for Liam." Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed pain. Then she turned and walked away, not in anger, but in quiet sadness that hit even harder. Richard stood there frozen, unable to move or respond. He watched her disappear down the hallway, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had felt in years. All his fears had come true in one moment. Emma had found out the truth, and now he had probably lost her. Not just as an employee, but as the one person who had brought light back into his son's life, and his own. He leaned against the wall, staring at the floor. He thought about all the moments they had shared, the quiet conversations, the laughter, the way she understood Liam without forcing anything. He had let his fear guide his actions, and now it had pushed away the one person who had actually cared. He didn't know what to do next. Apologies didn't feel like enough. Nothing he could say would erase the lie, and worst of all, he wasn't sure if she would ever look at him the same way again. Meanwhile, Emma walked outside into the garden, trying to collect her thoughts. She wasn't furious, but she was hurt. Hurt that someone she had come to trust had been hiding something so big. She sat on a bench near the garden path, staring at the trees. Her mind was full of questions. Had every conversation been part of the test? Did he ever really see her as a person, or just someone to observe? But in her heart, she knew something else too. Richard didn't do what he did out of cruelty. He did it out of fear, fear of being let down again, fear of trusting the wrong person around his son. Still, it didn't make it easier. Emma had always been honest, always given her best. She had felt something growing between her and Richard, a strange connection she didn't fully understand. And now that connection felt damaged, not broken completely, but shaken. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew she needed space. Richard didn't follow her. He stayed in the house, pacing slowly near Liam's room. Liam was napping peacefully, unaware of everything that had happened. Richard peeked inside and watched him breathe softly. He thought about how much Liam had changed since Emma arrived. His progress, his comfort, his trust, all of it had come because of her. Richard felt the guilt pressing harder. He knew she had every reason to walk away now, but deep inside, he hoped she wouldn't. He hoped she could forgive him, not because he deserved it, but because Liam still needed her. And if he was honest, so did he. The house felt colder now, even though nothing had physically changed. Everything looked the same, but something had shifted. A truth had been revealed, and now everything rested on what Emma would decide to do next. Richard sat down by the doorway, resting his head against the wall. He didn't cry, but his chest felt heavy. The secret was no longer a secret. Richard spent most of the next morning looking for Emma. He had barely slept the night before. He kept going over their last conversation in his head, the moment she discovered his identity, her quiet words, and the way she walked away. He didn't want to leave things like that. He couldn't. Around midday, he saw her through the window, sitting alone on a bench in the garden. She was staring at the flowers, deep in thought. Richard walked out slowly, no longer dressed as the janitor. He wore a plain shirt, no gloves, no tools, just himself. Emma noticed him coming but didn't move. He stopped a few feet away and spoke gently. "Emma, I owe you an apology." She said nothing. He stepped closer, careful not to rush her. "I lied because I was scared. I've lost too much. My wife, my peace. I didn't want to lose Liam too." His voice cracked slightly. "You gave him something no one else ever could." She didn't interrupt. Richard sat down on the edge of the bench, leaving space between them. He took a deep breath and continued. "After my wife died, I shut everyone out. I didn't know how to be a father to a child with so many needs, and I definitely didn't know how to trust anyone near him. Every time I tried, people treated him like a problem, like a project, but you didn't, you just saw him." Emma's eyes softened, but she still held back. Richard kept talking. "You brought him back to life, Emma." He laughed again. He spoke. "He called you Mommy." His voice broke at that last word. "You gave him a voice and gave me hope again." He looked down at his hands, then turned to her. "I know I made mistakes, but I don't want to lose what we have, not just for Liam, for me too. I came here to ask if you'll stay, not as an employee, as family." She wasn't angry anymore, just overwhelmed. So much had happened in such a short time. She had come to that house for a job, expecting routines, silence, and nothing more. Instead, she found Liam, a boy who slowly opened up to her, who smiled when she sang, and calmed down when she held him. And she had also found Richard, a man broken by grief, who had tried to protect his son the only way he knew. "Family," she repeated softly. Richard nodded. "Not a title, not a label, just a place where you belong without having to act or pretend." Emma looked away for a moment. "I never planned to get this close," she said, "but I did, and now I can't imagine leaving him." Then she glanced back at Richard. "If I say yes, it has to be on one condition." Richard nodded quickly, listening. Emma said, "I have to be myself, always. No roles, no tests." "Yes," he said, "exactly that. I don't want you to be anything other than who you are. You're already everything we need." Emma gave a small, quiet laugh. The tension between them finally started to ease. The heavy wall that had separated their worlds had cracked. Now, it was gone. She looked back toward the house, where the large window faced the garden. Liam was there, sitting in his wheelchair by the glass. He looked outside, spotted her and smiled. He lifted one hand and tapped the glass softly. Emma's heart melted again. That little boy, who used to hide from the world, was now reaching out to her. She turned to Richard. "Then yes," she said, "I'll stay." Richard exhaled like he had been holding his breath for hours. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't just polite. It was full of relief. Emma looked up at the sky for a second, still processing everything. Then she whispered, "Let's start again. For real this time." No one said anything for a moment. They didn't need to. Something unspoken had changed. This wasn't about contracts or paychecks anymore. It was about connection. Emma walked beside Richard, not behind him. As they reached the back steps, Liam was already waiting at the door with Mrs. Collins standing nearby. He was still smiling, holding the little clay dog Emma had once made. When she stepped through the door, Liam stretched out his arms, something he had never done before with such clarity. Emma bent down and hugged him, holding him gently. Richard watched with a soft expression. Mrs. Collins, though surprised, said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, giving them privacy. Emma looked at Richard one more time. "We'll take care of him together," she said. Richard nodded. "And we'll take care of each other too." For the first time in years, the house didn't feel cold. It finally felt like home. That evening, the three of them had dinner together in the smaller dining room. It wasn't fancy, just soup, bread, and juice. But it felt important. Liam sat between them, calm and happy. He looked from Emma to Richard and made soft sounds as if he was trying to speak more. Emma smiled and encouraged him gently. Richard listened and responded with patience. It was the first time all three shared a meal like that. No silence, no tension. Just small steps towards something new. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Emma read a story to Liam while Richard listened quietly. As the boy drifted to sleep, Emma looked at Richard and said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." He nodded. "Neither do you." The past wasn't erased, but it was no longer holding them back. What began as a job had become something real, stronger than any plan, stronger than any fear. That night, they weren't employer and employee. They were simply a family. Months had passed since everything changed in the mansion. The days no longer felt long or heavy. There was movement now, voices, and even laughter. The house had a new rhythm. Liam had made real progress. He attended adapted lessons every week with a visiting teacher. They used visual cards, drawings, and special sounds to help him communicate. Emma sat with him during the lessons, supporting every small step. Liam had learned to point at objects, use basic signs, and draw shapes that showed what he wanted. His drawings now filled the walls of the hallway outside his room. Richard worked from home more often, keeping his meetings shorter and always joining meals with Emma and Liam. They had routines now. Breakfast together, afternoon walks, story time in the evenings. The staff noticed the difference too. The silence of the house was gone. Life had returned in a way no one expected. What once felt like a museum now felt like a place where real people lived and connected. Emma had also changed during those months. With Richard's encouragement and help, she finished an online course in special education. She had always wanted to study more but never had the time or money. Now she felt confident, capable, and motivated. She even started a small project in town, working with mothers who had children with special needs. Once a week, she would meet a group of women in the community center to share tips, routines, and simple tools that had helped her with Liam. They talked, laughed, and supported one another. Emma's experiences with Liam had given her a voice she didn't know she had. Richard admired her drive. He often helped fund her activities quietly, never wanting to take credit, but always supporting her ideas. The staff respected her. Mrs. Collins, who once kept a distant posture, now smiled at Emma with real warmth. Emma had gone from an outsider to a central part of that house and that family. In the living room, some things had stayed the same. The large shelves still held the same books. The antique clock still ticked. The old portrait of Richard's late wife still sat on the middle shelf, her calm face looking out. But now, next to it, was a second photo, a new frame, placed with care. It showed Emma, Richard and Liam standing together. Richard had his hand on Liam's shoulder. Emma was leaning close, smiling. Liam, dressed in a clean blue shirt, was laughing in the photo, his mouth open, his eyes bright. Next to the frame was the shell, the same one that had once calmed his cries. It no longer needed to be hidden or kept in a drawer. It was part of their story now. Visitors who came to the house often stopped to look at the photo. The contrast between the two frames told a quiet but powerful story of loss, of healing, and of something new that had been built with care. One afternoon, a visitor arrived. He was a friend of Richard's from a business partnership, unfamiliar with the recent changes in the house. As he admired the room, he paused in front of the photo shelf. He pointed to the newer photo and asked, "Who's this lady next to you?" Before Richard or Emma could respond, Liam, who had been playing nearby, stood up and walked over. He looked at the photo, then at the man, and answered clearly, "She's my heart, Mommy." The room fell quiet for a second. Richard smiled, his chest full of pride. Emma placed a hand gently on Liam's back. The guest looked confused at first, but then nodded with understanding. No one needed to explain further. That moment said everything. Liam had found his way to name the connection, the feeling, the role that Emma played. She wasn't trying to replace anyone, but she had become something unique, someone chosen by love, not by blood, but no less real because of it. Later that evening, the three of them sat in the garden. Richard had brought out some lemonade. Emma held a notebook full of Liam's newest drawings, and Liam played quietly with clay in his lap. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. Everything that once hurt now had space to heal. Richard sometimes still thought about the early days, the cold rooms, the silence, the way he had pretended to be someone else out of fear. It seemed like another life. Emma had entered that space with patience and had slowly brought warmth back into their world. Liam, once locked inside his own walls, now looked at them with trust and affection. The three of them had created something none of them had planned for. It hadn't started with love at first sight or some magical transformation. It had been built slowly, through touch, words, drawings, and trust. And now it was strong, stronger than loss, stronger than fear. Inside the house, as the sun began to set, the photo on the shelf caught the last bit of light. Two portraits side by side. One of the woman who had given Liam life, and one of the family that gave him the rest of it. The shell sat in between, a simple reminder of everything they had overcome. The house, once a symbol of pain, was now filled with color, sounds, and a future that felt real. There was no more pretending, no more hidden truths, just a family that had found each other in the most unexpected way. Emma leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. Liam showed her a new clay figure, a dog with big ears. She smiled and nodded. "It's perfect," she said. He smiled back, and in that quiet moment, nothing else mattered. The story wasn't about a billionaire, a housekeeper, or a child with challenges. It was about three people who, against the odds, found something rare, a true home. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe until next time.